Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave,
on behalf of every father and every mother,
wings for freedom. On behalf of our warriors,
and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have a great show for you today. If you could, please do hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps us out, helps spread the word. We also keep a Twitter account and a Blue Sky account, so you can head over there for updates and various stuff like that. And of course, we have our main effort, our website, Tochnyi.info. That's where we publish articles. We have a lot of great interactive maps and all kinds of cool stuff over there. So if you want to learn more about any topic you hear about on the stream, Tochnyi.info is a great place to look. So we've got a pretty standard broadcast for you this week, but it should be good. There's a lot going on. First, I'll present the news. That'll be followed by a little discussion with Stanimir about what's going on in Russia. And then we'll talk about a few other things, and then we'll do some Q&A. So chat, if you guys have any questions, or if you're watching the video after the fact, you can leave them in the comments, and we'll try to address them next time. But feel free to ask any questions you guys have at any point in the broadcast. So I will now present the news. These are the main headlines as of March 15th, 2026. First up, we have operations. Ukraine's general staff confirmed overnight strikes on 2 Russian facilities in Krasnodar Krai during the early hours of March 14th. The Afipsky oil refinery, located in the settlement of Afipsky, sustained a direct hit that resulted in a fire breaking out across the plant's grounds. The facility processes 6.25 million tons of oil annually, representing 2.1% of Russia's total refining output. The port infrastructure at Kavkaz in the Chushka area was also struck, with damage to the port's facilities confirmed. Both sites are considered part of Russia's military supply chain. The full extent of the damage at each location is still being assessed. A vessel docked at the Kavkaz port was also reported to have sustained damage in the attack. Ukrainian strike drones hit a chemical plant in the city of Kirovo-Chepetsk in Russia's Kirov region on the morning of March 13th. The targeted facility is part of the Ural Chem Company and specializes in producing mineral fertilizers, including ammonium nitrate and urea, supplying both industrial and agricultural sectors across Russia. 2 drones were reported to have struck the ammonia workshop, with a third hitting the polymer production workshop. The regional governor confirmed the attack, stating there were no reported casualties. Emergency services were said to have been deployed to the scene. During the strike, plant employees were said to have taken shelter in designated facilities, and an incoming shift was turned away before beginning work. The governor also cautioned residents against posting photos or videos of the site, warning of potential legal consequences. The plant had previously been struck on March 4th, when multiple Lyuty drones hit the facility and started a fire. Ukraine's Air Force struck the Kremeny L microelectronics plant in Bryansk with Storm Shadow missiles on the evening of March 10th, destroying several production workshops, including the facility's main workshop. Following the strike, a Ukrainian drone conducted aerial reconnaissance over the city, with footage released by the General Staff clearly showing substantial damage to the plant. The reconnaissance was carried out by a unit of the Raid Separate Regiment of Unmanned Systems. The General Staff described the attack as part of a broader campaign to degrade Russia's military-industrial capability. Kremeny L is Russia's second largest microelectronics manufacturer, with around 90% of its output going directly to the Russian Ministry of Defense. Its components are used in microchips found across a range of Russian weapons platforms, including cruise and ballistic missiles, as well as in radar systems featuring active phased array antennas. The company recorded a trade turnover of approximately 3.9 billion rubles in 2021. The plant has now been struck 6 times in total. Previous drone attacks in 2023 and 2024 had a limited effect on the facility, making this missile strike a significant escalation in targeting the site. The Storm Shadow is a long-range air-launched cruise missile jointly developed by France and the UK, designed to defeat air defenses and destroy high-value hardened targets. It carries a 450-kilogram warhead and has a declared range exceeding 250 kilometers in its export configuration and up to 560 kilometers for French and British forces. Up next, we have economy and aid. The governing board of the Ukraine Investment Framework has approved 8 new funding programs totaling $1.63 billion US, according to the Deputy Prime Minister for Reconstruction, who announced it on March 9th. Of the total amount, $508 million will go towards projects coordinated by the Ministry of Development of Communities and Territories. The single largest allocation, $144 million, is designated for railway infrastructure maintenance and expanding railway connections. This is followed by road infrastructure with $115 million, continuing the Roads of Solidarity project, covering logistics, repairs, and highway reconstruction. Housing will receive $134 million to scale up the Energodim and Vidnovidim programs focused on energy-efficient residential restoration. A further $28 million will fund the construction and repair of shelters within buildings restored under the European Investment Bank municipal programs. Border infrastructure was allocated $75 million as the first tranche towards modernizing crossing points along Ukraine's western border, with an additional $11 million topping up existing projects. Beyond the Ministry of Development's allocation, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development's portion of the package includes $109 million for decentralized heat and energy supply products to be implemented directly with cities and businesses. The Deputy Prime Minister noted that the financing combines EIB loan resources with EU grant support, which reduces the direct burden on Ukraine's national budget. Sweden has added $61.5 million US to the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, bringing its total contribution to $282.6 million, according to Ukraine's Ministry of Energy. The funding is directed at repairing and restoring energy facilities damaged by Russian strikes, procuring critical equipment, and implementing passive protection measures for energy infrastructure. The energy minister referenced World Bank estimates, putting Ukraine's total energy recovery needs at $90.6 billion US, and noted that repair and reconstruction work is ongoing around the clock. Preparations for the upcoming year's heating season have already begun, an unusually early start that reflects the accumulated scale of damage to the country's power grid. The new contribution is part of a broader pattern of Swedish financial support for Ukraine. In February of 2026, Sweden announced a wider aid package worth $1.3 billion US and separately committed $100 million toward the purchase of American weapons for Ukraine under the Pearl Project. In other Swedish news, Swedish authorities boarded a sanctioned oil tanker suspected of belonging to Russia's shadow fleet in the Baltic Sea on the evening of March 12th, after identifying safety concerns and possible maritime rule violations. The Swedish Coast Guard, supported by the police, intercepted the 228-meter tanker Sea Owl in Swedish territorial waters off of Trelleborg. The vessel appears on the European Union's sanctions list and is suspected of being part of the Shadow Fleet. The ship was flying the flag of Comoros, but authorities believe it may not actually be registered there. If confirmed, the tanker would have been sailing under a false flag, leaving no recognized state responsible for overseeing its safety or regulatory compliance. The Coast Guard's Deputy Chief of Operations stated that the overall assessment pointed to a high risk of safety deficiencies on board, and that on this basis, the vessel could not be permitted innocent passage due to the threats posed to maritime safety and the environment. Coast Guard personnel boarded the ship and began searching it and interviewing crew members. Prosecutors have opened a preliminary investigation focused on suspected unseaworthiness, with additional authorities potentially joining depending on what the search uncovers. The tanker had been traveling from Santos, Brazil, toward Primorsk, Russia, and was carrying no cargo at the time of interception. Up next, we have international relations. Hungary's parliament voted on March 10th to pass a resolution opposing Ukraine's EU membership and continued European financial and military support. The measure passed with 142 votes in favor, 28 against, and 4 abstentions. Lawmakers called on Hungary's government to refrain from sending money or weapons to Ukraine and to support international peace efforts instead. The resolution argues admitting the country would risk drawing the EU directly into the war. Ukraine was granted EU candidate status in 2022 following Russia's full-scale invasion, but Hungary has blocked the opening of the first accession clusters. Hungarian lawmakers also cautioned against moves to transform the EU into a military alliance and efforts to circumvent unanimity requirements in EU decision-making. The vote was passed before the upcoming Hungarian parliamentary elections, which will happen in around a month. 3 Ukrainian military specialist teams have been dispatched to Qatar, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia this week to explore potential cooperation involving drone supplies in exchange for missiles for air defense systems. A communications advisor to the president confirmed that a Ukrainian team had also traveled to Jordan, though it clarified that this related to a separate matter involving a visit to a U.S. military base in the country. Zelensky described the Middle Eastern outreach as broadly connected to the drone deal proposal Ukraine had previously put to the United States, which centers on interceptor drones, Ukraine's accumulated battlefield expertise, and production capacity that currently exceeds available funding. He said the priority for Ukraine in these discussions is missiles for Patriot air defense systems, specifically PAC-2 and PAC-3 variants, and that additional Patriot systems themselves would also be welcome if possible, although missiles remain the primary focus. Zelensky said the drone deal proposal remains open to the United States and that no agreement has yet been signed, describing the current status as a postponement rather than a refusal. He expressed a desire to sign the agreement with the U.S. president directly, noting it would also benefit Ukrainian defense companies. The president emphasized that Ukraine's drone warfare experience is uniquely valuable, stating that countries that have acquired interceptor drones have found that they are ineffective without Ukrainian operators, software, and operational knowledge. And last item this week, a United Nations inquiry has concluded that Russia's forced removal and transfer of Ukrainian children from occupied territories constitutes crimes against humanity and war crimes, with findings that directly implicate President Vladimir Putin. The Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine examined 1,205 confirmed cases and conducted over 200 interviews, concluding that the removals followed a widespread and systematic pattern. The report was published on March 10th. The commission found Putin's involvement traceable from before the full-scale invasion, with Russian authorities at the highest levels having coordinated the deportations according to a carefully organized plan. In May of 2022, Putin signed a decree fast-tracking Russian citizenship for Ukrainian children without parental care. Russia's Commissioner for Children's Rights played a central coordinating role, organizing transport and placements, and ICC arrest warrants for the commissioner as well as Putin were issued in March of 2023. Children were moved through transit centers in Russia's border regions before being dispersed across 21 Russian regions, where they were placed with families or institutions and granted Russian citizenship. In at least 2 cases, children's names and places of birth were altered in official records. Russia initially promoted adoption openly, then reversed its public position after the ICC warrants were issued, although the commission found that the adoptions continued in spite of this. Parents and guardians were routinely not informed of removals and in some cases were actively obstructed when attempting to retrieve their children. Children who returned reported psychological harm and ideological pressure while in Russian custody. Over 80% of the 1,205 confirmed cases remain unresolved. Ukraine's national database has recorded 20,000 abducted children, although official estimates range as high as 200,000 to 300,000. Fewer than 2,000 have been returned. The commission called on Russia to immediately halt deportations, disclose the whereabouts of all removed children, and facilitate their unconditional return. And that's it for the main headlines this week. We will now move to the next segment. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Russia with our friend Stanimir. So Stanimir, it seems like everything this week kind of falls along the theme of Russia is increasingly tightening the screws on their security apparatus. Obviously, I don't think it was a particularly easygoing place before all this started, but now it seems like we're getting into the point where there are security measures being taken that could only be described as almost irrational. I don't know how else to kind of say it. So we'll get into the specifics now, but I think that's kind of the general theme we're talking about. So the first one you wanted to talk about was recently someone got an extremely long prison sentence for a pretty minor crime involving criticism of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Is that right?
Yes. So a 54-year-old woman in Khabarovsk got a 17-year sentence for tearing down, I think it was 14 leaflets with advertisement to join the Russian army. They also added that this was treason because they somehow linked it to her communicating to Ukrainians who instructed her to tear down the leaflets, but I don't think Ukrainian special forces would be, or security services would be interested in tearing down just leaflets. They usually go for torching military conscription offices. So in this case, I think it's entirely down to the laws becoming even more draconian and unpredictable to see what kind of offense is going to get jail time. So basically, if you're in Russia and you see a military subscription, a person offering military subscription leaflets, take them, don't throw them in a trash bin, carry them home, keep them somewhere safe and say that you've never harmed them. Because now it seems that they're more valuable than a person's life given this sentence.
Oh, now I understand. So there was like a person handing out like pamphlets or leaflets, and like, just like I would on the street, if someone handed me, a pamphlet, I would just immediately throw it in the trash because I don't want it. And that's all she did. And she got 14 years in prison.
17 years for 14
Seven.
leaflets.
Oof. Why did they hand her 14 though? I don't understand.
I don't think they handed her. I think she found them and started destroying them, and
Oh, okay.
someone reported on her, and then the rest of the services added on extra things. Technically, the crime she did was treason, because according to the FSB, I think in this case it was coordinated with Ukrainian security services, so it fell in the line of treason, and that's why the 17 years were given. But given the way they control evidence in Russian courts when it comes to verdicts connected to the Russian military and discrediting it, just don't take leaflets, or if you take them, store them safely. They're more important than a person's life, given what sentence they give for manslaughter in Russia.
Yeah, and I think maybe as like a baseline, right? And normally that person would get maybe 5 years for discrediting the Russian army, but you're saying the difference here is that they've basically called her a traitor and that she's collaborating with the Ukrainians to undermine the Russian state, something like that. So they're really trying to make an example out of her, and they've kind of upgraded the charge, and that seems to be maybe what's going to be happening from now on in terms of their reaction to this stuff.
Yes, and given that it's for something so trivial in terms of the damage that's been done, the prosecution of such crimes in Russia is becoming insane. And also it's becoming something that more and more ordinary people are actually facing, because this is such a minor thing. Someone can tell on you that you threw out a leaflet in the trash, and now you have a possible sentence for discrediting the army just because of that. And that's just advertisement material that's discarded usually.
Yeah, and so 17 years in a Russian prison, especially if you're an older woman, you're not likely to last that long, I don't think. So it's a pretty harsh sentence. I would think it goes without saying.
Yeah, and she's 54. She'll be 71 if she comes out of prison.
So, and then I guess like on the theme of more overreactions, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the censorship laws that I believe took effect on March 1st. So what's going on with those?
Yes, so there are entire albums that are disappearing from Russian streaming services. Songs are being, so things like I Betrayed Russia is now, I Betrayed the Country is now censored. Drugs are being censored. Any reference to sexual misconduct is being censored. So this means that if you look at most Russian albums that have come out and have been popular over the last let's say 20 years, all of them have some sort of censorship now, or they've been removed. In one case, I think even a Russian billionaire bought the rights to the entire discography of a band and just took them offline, which is why right now Russians are buying MP3 players from the 2000s, so they can download the uncensored version of songs, and then they can listen to that song, even if there's also an internet blackout. And the second thing, the internet blackout is now becoming more and more common, with most of Russia's regions having it in some form. And now we've also hit Moscow and Moscow region.
Yeah, so that's actually the last thing I want to talk to you about before your general update, which is this Moscow internet outage. So as of last week, the Russians, shut down the internet at Moscow, like basically completely. And the Peskov, the Russian spokesperson, said that it was because of drones, Ukrainian drones. But it's the extent of this outage and the scale of it have been much larger than I think anything Moscow has seen in the war so far as I'm aware. It's been relatively common that if a Ukrainian drone attack is either imminent or happening, that they'll shut down internet, at a certain spot, maybe even in the whole city for a few hours. But we're talking about, at this point, I think it's been 7 days that the internet in Russia, or in Moscow, I should say, has been shut down. I think it goes without saying that this has enormous implications for the economy in Russia, or especially in Moscow, which is relatively digitized, especially compared to the rest of Russia. And a lot of businesses rely on the internet to function. So just being kind of arbitrarily told you don't have the internet for 7 days is a lot for people to deal with. I think we've seen a lot more grumbling from Muscovites than we've seen about other things involving the war with this internet outage. People seem pretty confused and upset, I guess, about it. I would argue that, again, like, it's definitely seems excessive. Like, their explanation that the drones are the problem doesn't make a ton of sense to me, because this has been like a complete blanket ban. There's been some like rumors and discussion in some Russian circles that because of the recent purges in the military, which we talked a little bit about last week, there's some members of Shoigu's circle still around that are being removed and accused of corruption. That there are some rumors, unsubstantiated, among Russian Telegram channels, that because of the purges in the military, they're a little bit paranoid about, they're talking about a coup, but some kind of disruption, basically. And so that's one reason they've shut down the internet, is to make sure that they have like a firm grasp while they go around and grab all these military guys. So that's maybe one possibility. Personally, I don't know if the likelihood of a coup, or like, these Shoigu guys are kind of washed up. I don't think that there's any real danger that the Russian state is truly worried about. I think Stanimir had a slightly better theory, which is that the FSB was recently given authority over internet shutdowns. And, for the FSB, I assume, everything looks like a nail to a hammer, right? Like, if they've been told they need to prevent Ukrainian drone attacks, and they have the tool to shut down the internet, and they don't care about whether the economy does anything or not. Like, they're on the hook for attacks, not for the economy. That would imply that maybe they're just shutting down the internet for their own, to sort of cover their own behinds. So I don't know, Stanmer, do you want to talk about that theory a little bit?
Yeah, so something that happened in late February was a new law that was signed in by Putin, and it was going to go into effect in about 10 days. I'm not sure if it's 10 calendar days or 10 work days, because if it's 10 work days, it lines up perfectly with the shutdown of mobile internet over Moscow. So it gives the authority to the FSB to shut down any forms of communications within Russia, and it gives the authority to do it secretly without notifying anyone. Because previously they would have need consent from Moscow Mayor Sobyanin, or from the governor of Moscow region, Voroblov, I think was his last name. And those people would have certainly said no to a full-scale ban. That is how I think this occurred. It's not so much that someone is going to stick out their necks for Shoigu, given that Putin has complete control over other forces within the Russian capital. We're talking about the Federal Security Service, that's FSO. We're talking about the units of the Russian Guard. We're also talking about the FSB that's stationed there. So there are plenty of forces to prevent just some guys from the military coming into Moscow at this point. Might have been different a few years earlier. And the other thing is that we also have figures for how damaging this is. So in the first 5 or 6 days, Russian businesses reported that the damage was somewhere in the range of 3 to 5 billion rubles. To put it into perspective, this is over $50 million in 1 week, and it's ongoing. The other thing that we've seen is that they also managed to not jam, but completely turn off the Wi-Fi and mobile internet inside the Russian Duma, which angered, I think, most of the Russian deputies, because they couldn't get internet for I think 2 or 3 days inside the Duma. That is no internet whatsoever, and they weren't given a good explanation why this was happening. And also, initially, they didn't introduce the whitelists. So they have whitelists when mobile internet is jammed, which includes sites which you can access while it's jammed, because there's certain restrictions lifted for those sites and those apps. So that wasn't working either. And also, I have to say that now the mobile internet restriction has been expanded also to Moscow region. It's not just Moscow. So they're really tightening the grip over the capital in terms of internet access. And this is something that Muscovites aren't really used to, as you said. So things like paper maps have gone up in sales by 170%. That's for road maps for the region. Folding maps are up 70% in sales. Moscow maps are up 20%. Wi-Fi routers sales are up 50%. Pagers, which is a return to the GSM technology from the 90s, they are up 73% in sales. So everything is reflecting in probably an expectation that this is the way things are going to be from now on. But this will be also very damaging to the Russian economy because Moscow is such a big portion of it. And if you include also Moscow region, it's a big chunk of Russia.
Yeah, so I think kind of taking all that stuff into account, right? I mean, the Russian state seems to expect their citizens to live in a cave, sing patriotic songs from 1850, and hang all their leaflets on a wall. And that seems to be kind of the expectation going forward, which, I'm obviously not an advocate for the Russian state, but it seems like there are more effective ways to accomplish whatever they're trying to accomplish than like all this seems excessive, even for Russia, I guess you could say. But if they want to hurt their own economy over this, more power to them. I guess like the final kind of chef's kiss of all this, Stanimir, you sent me a Telegram post that mentioned that recently a Ukrainian drone struck in Russia and they found a Ukrainian SIM card on it. In other words, they can use a Ukrainian SIM card in Russia to pilot a Ukrainian drone, meaning that all these internet shutdowns claiming to be about drones doesn't really protect them 100%. So I don't know, just funny addendum, right?
Yeah, but I don't think the goal for them is to just make things hard for Russians. I think the goal for them is to reach a state control level that's probably only exhibited in North Korea at this point with these shutdowns and how everywhere you get checked, your devices get checked by police in the Moscow metro. So you have to keep everything you do mostly a secret or give them a second device you have just for them and keep your other device somewhere hidden on yourself. So this is the extent to which Russians have to live a double life now. I think the only time in recent memory that's been in recent years, so let's say in the last 120 years, that things were worse was maybe during the height of Stalinism.
Yeah,
in terms of repressions.
It's been, even under the height of Putinism up until now, it's been, relatively like you can listen to the songs you want and you can go on the internet and do stuff as long as you're not directly confronting the Russian state about things. They didn't really bother anyone. Usually anyway. Obviously in Russia there are arbitrary things that happen, but this is a very unprecedented level of repression that's going on, and I guess we'll see the results. So far people are just grumbling, but you have to wonder, when you take away people's entertainment, you take away their internet, you take away all that stuff, like at some point that will cause some serious unrest, I think. But I guess we'll have to kind of wait and see, right?
Yes, but it's piling up with recent utility bills that are now cost more than utility bills you've seen in rich countries. And with this happening, and also we have some local protests happening all over the place because of the restrictions and the forced adoption of Macs. I think they're going to have some sort of a boiling point, and we'll see if Russian society actually does anything or develops some intricate way to be maliciously compliant with everything, because this has been their way so far.
Yeah, so I think that's all the stuff I want to talk to you about this week, Stanimir. I think we're ready now for your general update on the Russian economy.
Yes, and this week it's going to be sadly long, or maybe happily for people. I'll start first with the budget deficit numbers that came out for the first 2 months of 2026. Compared to 2025, the deficit increased by over 1 trillion rubles. It's almost 3.5 trillion rubles, so around 1.5% of Russia's estimated GDP. And revenues were at 4.8 trillion, and spending was at 8.2 trillion. Compared to 2025, revenue is down around 600 billion rubles. So in dollar terms, that should be around $7 billion, and it's even 200 billion rubles lower than in 2024. That is even before the inclusion of the new taxes and the new increases of the VAT. So that is clearly not helping the Russian government in terms of getting revenue into the budget. We also had the oil and gas revenue for the first 2 months of 2026. It decreased by 47.1%, so almost 50% down compared to 2025. And it's down to just 826 billion rubles. Again, that's a shortfall of close to 700 billion rubles, or I'm guessing in this case close to $8 billion. Someone correct me on that math because I'm not having the figures right now. And because of that, we learned that at the start of the year, the Russian Ministry of Finance suggested a decrease if non-critical spending by 10% in the budget. However, due to the conflict in the Middle East, and they're hoping a increase in revenue because of that, it's now put on hold. But this is just how bad the budget was doing if they had to start cutting it in terms of spending. And this is going to involve not social spending and not military spending, but it's going to involve other things like education and maybe healthcare. If they had to start doing that so early, things are very bad, despite the oil revenue that they're expecting to get. We also have updates on the situation with the oil that is currently at sea. The State Bank of India didn't allow transactions for Russian oil. This is despite the waiver that was offered by the US on sanctions when it comes to oil that is currently at sea and is from a Russian source, because the bank said that the duration of the waiver is too short to change its policy. So for Indian refineries that are buying this oil, they're going to have to look for other ways to pay for it and do transactions with it. The other thing I want to mention here is that when it comes to Russia, it taxes oil at 2 points. First, when it's extracted from the ground, there's a mineral extraction tax. That's the bulk of it. And then when it gets shipped, there's another tax in the form of duties on the oil that you export. And for oil that is currently at sea, the Russian government will get nothing directly from that if the sale happens at a very high price. The only thing that's going to come into the Russian government's budget is probably an increased profit for the company that sold it, if it reports a profit, and that's not a certainty for a lot of Russian companies. And this means that for now, at least, they're not going to get directly an ingestion of cash just because they sell more oil at a very high price that's sitting at sea. I would also point out that a lot of oil, when it comes to Russian exports, is already spoken for in long-term contracts, and there the price shift is not as pronounced as it would be. And the final thing is that the mineral extraction tax that we talked about, it's going to get into effect in April, because the way the price is calculated for the mineral extraction tax, it takes the previous month and the average price for the previous month for the combination of Ural oil and ESPO oil, and it uses that to calculate the current month's taxes. So because February still had the price of Russian Ural oil and ESPO oil at around $42, $43 per barrel, they're still not going to get a big increase in the oil taxes until April. But then we should see an increase because of the conflict. And if it persists until then, it's also going to be impacting the entire month, because March prices will be adjusted to that. Also, we know that Thailand, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka have discussed oil purchases from Russia. If they get a big contract, I'm guessing they're going to get discounts below what is currently being sold on the spot market. I think still Russian oil has a discount of around $30 when compared to Brent. But this has to be said is already enough for them to cover what's in the budget and then some, given the current prices. So if this continues week over week without any opening of the Hormuz Strait or any alternative sources of oil being let into the market, and without any alternative paths for tankers, we're seeing some of that from Saudi Arabia, but expect the Russian budget to actually start filling up, despite it having problems when it comes to both oil revenue and non-oil revenue currently. But they have a big, a tough road ahead of them because they're in that much of a hole, being down in revenue so significantly. We've seen 600 billion rubles down from 2025 is a lot when spending is that much higher than 2025. The other thing is that Russian steel producers are also taking an advantage from this conflict. It has led to higher freight rates for Chinese steel to the Gulf and the Middle East, so and the North African portion of the world, as well as Turkey. So they've raised their prices by $5 to $15 per ton. This is because the costs for Chinese companies have increased when it comes to freight tariffs by $20 to $30 per ton. This is an opening for Russian steel, of course. And also this might improve the situation on the Russian domestic steel market, because currently they were expecting to have their premium, at which they're selling to the domestic market, decrease by 27% to just $120 per ton. But this means that there's going to be an increase in that premium, or at least it's not going to decrease by as much due to the difficulty of Chinese steel to be shipped. And I have to say, however, that this is a far cry from the prices of the 2022 and 2023, when the steel prices were at around $600 to $700 per ton. So Russian steelmakers are going to have their situation improve, but not that drastically when it comes to their profits. So expect them to still not issue any dividends for the foreseeable future. Also, the Russian middle class, it seems, can no longer afford restaurants, and Russian restaurants are in a crisis. Russians are essentially switching to cheaper options, and that usually means fast food, or even skipping that, directly going to supermarket pre-prepared meals. And even older locations of fast food joints are seeing a decrease in sales by, I think, around 7.5%. And when it comes to the market, the fast food segment was the only one that reported growth over the first 10 months of 2025. However, prices at restaurants had to grow by 24% to cover costs during that period. And while restaurants as a whole saw a 2% increase in customers in 2025, this was due to new restaurants opening. And still, from the start of 2025, there were more new restaurants opening than were closing, as was the case for the final half of 2025. So existing restaurants actually saw a drop in customers, and the prices continue to rise, with the price growth from the start of the year to the middle of February being 2.5% when it comes to food prices in restaurants. And the thing they have to increase are salaries. They're offering also more benefits, and the rent is up by 10%. And additionally, in some cases, ingredients can be up as much as 15% in January 2026 alone. So Russian restaurants will likely no longer be a place that all Russians can afford. I think if you've been to other parts of the world, restaurants are not so generally affordable as they were in Russia for Russians. But this is something that they've been sheltered from for the last several years. But now it's going to turn into another benefit that they had compared to the 90s that is going away. And we should expect more closures of restaurants, and even in some cases, closures of fast food locations that are not profitable anymore. The other thing I want to mention as a big news story from this week is that Russia's Bank, which is the bank of the Russian military, essentially, not the military, but the military-industrial complex, in 2025, it had a 19.2 billion ruble loss. Now, this is compared to 2024, when it had a 65.2 billion rubles in profit. And in 2023, it had 117 billion rubles in profit, when the going was good for the expansion of the Russian defense sector. This is largely due to the need for setting aside 297 billion in reserves versus just 94 billion in 2024. And almost all of these, I think 287 billion, were due to bad loans from the defense industry. And I have to point out that already in 2025, the bank had to be recapitalized by almost 30 billion rubles from the budget. So the Russian defense industry isn't actually making any money whatsoever, it seems, and it's not even able to cover its loans from the government at preferential rates, and it's defaulting on them significantly. The next thing I want to talk this week about in terms of major news stories is that we had also an investigation of Russian shopping centers. And in terms of international brands, both international and Russian brands are closing down unprofitable stores, and more space is being left open and vacant. Since the start of 2024, retailers closed down almost 24,000 square meters in malls. 92% of this occurred in 2025 to 2026, so that's very recent. And in 2026, something different is going to happen with no single international brand is expected to enter the Russian market, while 8 are expected to leave it. And the vacancy in shopping centers in Moscow has now reached 6%. This is quite a significant number for Moscow, and I have to say that the rest of the country is very far behind the 6%. That is at higher levels of vacancies. And also, it's projected that the volume of new high-quality malls that are going to be commissioned in 2026 is going to be 21% lower than 2025, and that is just around 260,000 square meters. And that's even going to be even worse for 2027 to 2028, where only 420,000 square meters. So if you divide it by the 2 years, they're going to have 210,000 square meters, which means that they're down almost by 20% in terms of commissioning of new malls. The market is really struggling. We also had a survey of Russian small businesses, which had the worst performance since the start of the survey. So 31% of Russian small businesses are considering closing down or selling their business as of the last time the poll was taken. The share has risen 8% year over year, and the survey has been done since 2021. The data of the current results was collected between January 20th and February 19th, 2026. So expectations were the worst ever recorded, with 52% saying that the business climate will only worsen and only 12% expecting it to improve. By comparison, when Russia was hit by sanctions in the first quarter of 2022, those who expected things to worsen were 48%, and those who expected an improvement were 20%. 49% of businesses said that they're in survival mode, so basically just covering costs, which is the highest in the last 5 years that this has been collected, and only 8% of businesses expect growth. 49% reported their revenue decreasing quarter over quarter, and 29% reported that the revenue isn't enough to cover expenses. So they're basically, in effect, in bankruptcy. So this is a significant part of Russia's economy. It seems that Russia's small businesses are actually doing much worse now than even at the start of the full-scale invasion, when there was a lot of panic. And I don't think there's going to be much of a recovery unless the government just throws money at them. And right now they have the problem of just covering the budget deficit without even thinking for distributing more money to the business. When it comes to banking, the net profit of Sberbank for February 2026 rose by 21.1% to 162.8 billion rubles. For the first 2 months, it rose by 21.4% to 324.6 billion rubles. Sberbank is a bank that's doing exceptionally well because of the offers of a lot of preferential loans and mortgages that it does. Despite this, I want to remind you that the CEO of Sberbank went behind Nabiullina's back to badmouth her to Putin that the banking sector was doing no profits. Nothing could be further from the truth right now, especially when the central bank is giving them money to essentially buy Russian debt at a premium and get a profit out of that. When it comes to commodities, for grain and Russian agriculture as a whole, we got the statistics for 2025, and the net profit of the Russian agricultural sector dropped by 23.5%. This is a significant drop for the year, and I don't think the current data shows that there's going to be any improvement in 2026, at least if I'm looking at the grain data that came out today. Also, there right now are protests by small farmers in villages. That is in Siberia. It started from Novosibirsk. This is because they're being forced to kill their animals because some types of disease, although there's speculation that this isn't actually disease, but it's actually bigger agricultural companies bribing the local veterinary authorities to start a campaign of culling animals for a particular disease without actually there being any evidence. And Russian small farmers are actually trying to close roads and saying that you might as well kill them because if you take away the animals they have nothing. And the offer that they're getting right now for the animals that are being killed from the government as support is just 170 rubles per kilo, which is not enough to cover their costs if you take away all their livelihood. And this is just a paltry sum. There's talk about further aid to them from the regional governments, but those really don't have any money to spend on this. When it comes to coal, we have that the net loss of Russian coal companies in 2025 came to over the 350 billion rubles estimated by the Russian government to reach 408 billion rubles. In 2024, it was 112 billion rubles, so almost a 400% increase. And the share of profitable companies dropped from 46.7% to 33.9% in 2025. And the total profit of the companies that had profits went down almost by half to 76.9 billion rubles, where the companies that had losses almost doubled their losses to 485 billion rubles. And also we got news that in 2025, Russian coal exports through the eastern ports increased by 6.1% compared to 2024, and exports through the southern ports rose by 20% again compared to 2024. And this is linked to the shift to new customers right now, for which, for example, the northern ports in the Baltic aren't ideal when it comes to the distance to the customers. When it comes to Russian gas and oil, we had some not so nice news from Spain, which increased its purchases of Russian LNG by 109% in January 2026. And this raised the share of Russian LNG in terms of their entire LNG purchases to 14.6%, which makes it the third highest exporting country to Spain after the US and Algeria. We also had the Tatneft's net profit for 2025 dropped by 42% to 146 billion rubles, and the revenue decreased by 11.5% to just 1.38 trillion rubles in 2025. And finally, in terms of oil and gas news, Russia increased its liquefied petroleum gas exports in 2025 by 2.3% to 3.86 million tons. Turkey is the largest buyer, with imports going up 12%. China is in second place having doubled in its imports in 2025 compared to 2024. And surprisingly, the third place, I think, is kept by Afghanistan, for which this is a major fuel source, which is not something that's the case for the rest of the world. When it comes to the construction market, the expectation for 2026 is that investment in real estate is going to drop by 31% to 700 billion rubles. And for the first quarter of 2026, already dropped by over 50% compared to Q1 of 2025 to just 61 billion rubles. And the transactions for warehouses in Moscow and Moscow region are expected to decrease by 14% in 2026 to just 2.1 million square meters. And for the January-March period, they decreased by 57% to just 0.2 million square meters. But that's a low quarter usually for the sales of warehouses. When it comes to interesting data points, the first one comes from the Russian Ministry of Labor. In 2025, it issued 75,400 permits for highly qualified specialists, which is 43% higher than the 50,800 in 2024. The number of canceled permits also rose by 20% from 20,200 to 20,200 from 16,100. And this is again a sign that in terms of qualified professionals, Russia is really having a shortage, and that this might not actually be enough to cover the actual shortfall because of the way the permit system works and the way you have to apply for them and the way you have to ask for increased quotas, which usually aren't fulfilled because of the bureaucracy involved, especially now with the more nationalistic turn of Russian authorities. We also had that the Russian Far Eastern Railways for the first 2 months of 2026 decreased its container transportation by 8.6% compared to 2025. For empty containers and loaded containers, the total number was 208,000. And for loaded containers, which is the bulk of the imports from China, the decrease was 10.1% to 191,700 containers loaded. When it comes to inflation and debt, first we had the inflation figures for the period from the 3rd of March to the 10th of March. It came in at 0.11%. For March, the inflation right now is 0.14%, and for the year so far is 2.5%. I have to point out that there was an adjustment of 0.41% in January, but there was also a positive adjustment, so increase up to in February, which raised inflation for February to over 0.7%. And when it comes to the Russians' Ministry of Finance auctions for debt, this week again they managed to hold both of them. In the first auction, they managed to sell around 75 billion rubles at the yield of 14.89%. And in the second auction, they managed to sell around 65 billion rubles at the yield of 14.82%. So the yield has again started to rise, and it might hit about 15% despite the decrease of the interest rate. Although we're yet to see what the central bank is going to do regarding that in the next week on Friday. And I think that's it for me for this week.
Okay, thank you very much, Standomir. As always, stay tuned every week for an update on the Russian economy by Standomir. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about this week. I didn't think I had much to talk about, but then it kind of snowballed. So the first thing I just wanted to talk about real quick is something went over my head this week, and I'm glad I know Colby because he clarified it for me. Colby, are you there?
I'm here.
Beautiful. So I just wanted to know about this thing that happened where I think it was Sweden. I forget which country. It was like one of the European countries.
Norway.
Norway. Okay, yeah. Okay,
it was Mr. Ireland.
Yeah,
it wasn't me, but someone from my country.
Okay, so what happened was Norway made a purchase. The U.S. disclosed that the purchase was made because it was above a certain amount, and that amount was $15 million. But the thing was, or 14 million. But the thing was, people all took that to mean it was only $14 million. And that's not the case. And even that even went above my head. So I guess if you want to just explain this whole thing, it might be helpful for people.
Yeah, this is a good case study in why it's really important for people to read things carefully. And we are all very guilty of this. I know I'm guilty of it. Social media has fried all of our brains. We all have very short attention spans now. But it is important to try and read things carefully and read things, twice over, especially before you hit the reply button and start angrily sending messages or quote tweeting saying, "Oh, $14 million, what? That's nothing." Well, if you read carefully what our friend and colleague Alex said was at least $14 million. And I jumped in with the added context explaining what's actually happening here. So Norway sent a request to the United States to retransfer some defense articles which they had purchased from the United States through the foreign military sales program to Ukraine. So things that the United States government has sold to Norway at some point in the past through the foreign military sales program. And those things had a original acquisition value above $14 million, which is the statutory threshold at which major defense equipment has to be notified to Congress when there's any transfer involved. And Norway's now sending this to Ukraine. So Alex spotted the notification to Congress for this particular transfer and another one, and we'll get to the other one in a moment. It was actually two other transfers, so there's a total of 3 here. But this main one, it's major defense equipment, value greater than $14 million in the original acquisition value. Norway had purchased it at some point in time. We don't know what it is. I'm assuming that it's probably AMRAAMs. Could be other things. Could be anything, any type or multiple types, multiple categories of MDE that Norway's bought through the FMS program. So it could be other aircraft and munitions, stuff like small diameter bombs. But probably AMRAAM is what I would guess, and defer to Norwegian media to go ask the Norwegian government if they want to elaborate on what it is that they're retransferring to Ukraine. But anyway, the State Department has approved the transfer. It's been notified formally to Congress, and then in the coming weeks, they will be able to make those shipments to Ukraine. So that's what's going on with that. And then in addition to that, there's 2 separate direct commercial sales that have also just been approved and notified to Congress to go to Ukraine. So this is defense articles that the Ukrainian government is directly purchasing from American companies. And there's 2 such sales that were also just recently notified to Congress. Those are over $1 million. Again, so we don't know what the actual value is. It just states what the reporting threshold is. So for category 1 U.S. munitions list articles, which is most likely 50 caliber heavy machine guns, is like the main thing in category 1, $1 million, at least $1 million of those, and 2 separate sales that have just been approved. So stuff is going to Ukraine. Stuff continues to go to Ukraine through a variety of different mechanisms, whether it's direct commercial sales like this or third-party transfers, like from Norway, other mechanisms. Hopefully that explains for people what's going on with this, because there was a lot of confusion and anger when Alex initially posted it, because it wasn't explicitly spelled out that, he said at least $14 million, but, it's a little bit more than, people just assumed it was the minimum amount rather than it could be anything. Could be, as I write, it could be $14 billion. Probably not $14 billion, but all we know is that it's at least $14 million, and it's AMRAAM's original acquisition value, depending on when they were bought, still somewhere around $1 million. So again, I defer to the Norwegian government if they want to talk about what they're providing to you in Ukraine in this case, but that's my guess, is probably just more AMRAAMs for NASAMS or the F-16s.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Colby. It really clears it up. I think it's like a good thing to keep in mind, I guess, when you're looking at some of these direct sales from the U.S. Is that it's just a matter of what they're legally required to disclose. It could be 14 million, it could be 50 million, could be 14 billion, as you said. We just don't know. That's like the only answer we can really give. There have been a couple of discussions about Norway, or there's been a couple of disclosures, I guess, from Norway that they're buying certain things from the U.S. Erlen, do you have any thoughts about like what they could be referring to there?
So the Minister of Defense said on a podcast he was visiting that Norway has gone long, to long extent trying to soup up whatever possible or available munitions were being willing to be sold to Norway and then transferred to Ukraine in Europe. But he didn't say specific which kind of missiles, but he said missiles for NASAMS and Patriot in that podcast. It doesn't say how many, it doesn't say the value. He said also that Norway is continuing to buy munitions from the US, but that it has been slower than what they expected last summer when some of these agreements were made with between NATO or European NATO countries and the US.
Yeah, so I think that's probably. Oh, go ahead, Colby.
I'll add that we do know that the ERAM cruise missiles are being funded in part by Norway and other European countries. That sale was approved last year. So that's something that Norway's funding. Norway has made contributions to the Pearl program to buy things from the United States as well, and was doing that through the sort of predecessor programs to Pearl during the Biden administration, prior to that. So there's a lot, as I said, there's a lot of different mechanisms through which things get to Ukraine, even though, these days, a lot of them are less public because there's not regular drawdowns being announced. But there's still things that are going more than people realize. And, on the direct commercial sales in particular, I'll have news on that hopefully this month. Depends on when the State Department gets their affairs together and publishes things that are overdue. But I'll have more to share on what's happening with that particular program in the future.
I guess a sign of Norway's commitment to the Iran program happened when Kongsberg bought up the one that won the competition or the contract, right?
Correct. Well, yeah. So there were two different companies were selected to move forward with the Iran program. Zone 5 Technologies and Co-Aspire, and Kongsberg has decided to purchase Zone 5 Technologies. So yes, absolutely. Kongsberg is deepening their defense industrial cooperation with the United States and expanding their footprint in the United States. And yeah, so the Norwegians are definitely looking to play a big role in this space.
Do you have any estimated time frame for first deliveries of the Iran missiles?
They're due to begin this fall. Yeah. And there might be some like prototypes that may have already arrived. I haven't asked my my contacts at the Ukrainian MOD about that, but I'll see what they have to say, whether they're able to share anything or not. But yeah, what we know based on the reporting is that deliveries are scheduled, and based on what the requirements of the initial RFI RFP were, it should be this fall. We'll start seeing serial production missiles head to Ukraine from the two different prime contractors.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully that clears some things up. Colby, I feel like you gave such a good and thorough answer. I can't help but plug your published work on The Insider. Are you publishing anything recently, or?
I just have a piece out at SIPA that was just published yesterday. So you can see that on my Twitter feed. Retweeted a couple of people that were graciously sharing it, and I will do a little write-up myself probably for Monday morning, giving the Coles Notes version and linking to the piece. People can go read it. It's on the question of what's happening in the Middle East and kind of implications for Ukraine and what Ukraine has to offer in terms of teaching the rest of the world about counter UAS and broader implications for Ukraine going forward in terms of interceptor supply. So that is up at CEPA right now, and people can go check that out.
Yeah, thanks, Colby. Sorry, Center for European Policy
Analysis.
That's right. Yeah. So just to make sure people got that. Cool. So yeah, it's I think it's a really interesting topic actually for an article. It's very timely, and a lot of people are talking about it in the media right now and online. So yeah, cool. Check out Colby's article. I'm gonna do that. Okay. So yeah, I think that's that topic. I've got a lot of topics here. Next, I think I'm going to do my little update on Hungary. So someone left a comment about this week. Sorry, CEPA's website is down. What? Maybe it's the wrong link. Let's see. Sorry, we're going to try to find the link for Colby's article, I think. Anyway, there was someone who left a comment on Twitter that Macron said on Friday that the EU is going to pass the 80 billion to Ukraine despite Hungary's downvote. Yeah, I think like sometimes I don't report things in the main headlines because it takes too much other context explanation, and that's kind of what this segment started as, is like me trying to explain things that took more than just saying what happened. So I'll do my best because someone asked to give an update. I gave an update last week on it, but there have been some developments. But I think I have to kind of start from the beginning in order to explain everything. So I'm going to do my best to go through it. Okay, so all this started, let's say, like 2 years ago, basically. Ukraine was facing a serious budget shortfall. Aid to the U.S. was drying up. A lot of European programs. There were some good bilateral programs, but like basically Ukraine needed a big chunk of money, let's say 30 to 40 billion per year to cover a budget shortfall. And that money needed to sort of be agreed to by Europe to be provided. That was like the big question in terms of Ukraine's economy and government moving forward. In terms of Ukraine's like economic situation and budget situation, basically, to oversimplify things, everything that they're taking in their pocket, like the tax revenue they're collecting, basically almost all that's going to the military to defend the country, right? For obvious reasons. But that means that a lot of programs, the schools, the hospitals, all that stuff, that is being funded through other mechanisms, mainly loans and things like that, right? And aid from the EU. So that's the situation that Ukraine faces. They could use basically another 5 billion in investment for their military industries, and basically 40 billion to kind of run their civilian government while they have to fight this war with a much bigger opponent. So that was the situation Ukraine was facing. The solution proposed was to take the Russian assets that were available to Europe and give them to Ukraine, or create a financial mechanism that would be built around that collateral, basically. So that was the discussion. And I don't remember how long this discussion went on, but it went on forever. We're going to use these Russian assets or the money derived from them to give direct financial aid to Ukraine. That resulted eventually in Belgium kind of saying, look, we feel like this whole thing kind of leaves us on the hook for this problem. If we just seize this money, then, all of a sudden in 10 years, if a European court decides, which we don't have jurisdiction over, that Belgium stole that money basically by seizing it, that would be like I don't like their entire GDP or something. I don't remember how much it was, but it's like compared to the size of Belgium, it's like it would be a significant blow, and it would probably explode their financial sector and probably have even broader implications for Europe. But the point is, Belgium felt like they were on the hook, and so they basically said no. And they said, if you want this money, you're going to have to do it through an EU mechanism. You're going to have to legislate a way to deal with this problem that we have where Belgium feels like they're on the hook. So the EU said fine. So then, fast forward another few months of negotiations, and we get the $90 billion loan, which is a good workaround, actually. The problem was that Belgium felt like they were being on the hook for seizing the money. So what the EU did was they said, we're going to give Ukraine a $90 billion loan, and then we're going to make repaying that loan contingent on Russia paying war reparations to Ukraine. So basically, Ukraine doesn't have to repay the loan until Russia starts paying back. So what that did was kind of indirectly link the loan to the Russian assets. It moved the problem from being Belgium's problem to all these European countries said, we're going to loan Ukraine money, and we're going to legally require that Russia, indirectly pay for it, basically. And that kind of was enough of a guarantee to the European financial system to say, okay, we can recognize that big chunk of money frozen in Belgium is a piece of collateral that we can use as a loan mechanism for Ukraine. So everything's great. Again, Ukraine really needs this money for the next 2 years. This 90 billion is 2 years of keeping Ukraine going. That resulted in this 90 billion loan, which is great. The problem now is, of course, Hungary. Basically, Russia bombed a pipeline, and Ukraine has been, in Hungary's estimation, slow in fixing it. And this has become a huge contentious issue for Orban in his re-election campaign. There's jokes right now that he's running against Zelensky because Zelensky's face is just everywhere on posters in Hungary. He's, as far as all the polls say, he's losing this election campaign. And that culminated in last week, a sort of bank robbery that happened. I don't know what else to call it. The Ukrainians were bringing money back to Ukraine. It's a common thing for banks to exchange money, especially in Ukraine, where like the banking system isn't totally trusted because it failed like right when the invasion happened. So people like cash. So they were bringing some cash in through Hungary, and Hungary just like seized it. And as basically right now, I think the response from the EU has been a little anemic on this. Like this was Hungary took pictures of this money that had official paperwork from an EU bank in Austria and said, yeah, we're keeping it. And so far, I don't know. I'm assuming there will be some indirect repercussions for Hungary moving forward. But so far, the EU has been a little quiet about it. And I think part of it is they're just kind of hoping the problem will go away because of the election coming up. But also they're trying to resolve this $90 billion issue. And this is where we move forward. And I don't have a lot of like insider knowledge or anything. So I'm just trying to use my best logic. And so I don't have access to how people really feel about this, but I can take some clues and try to argue that this is what's going on. So the Europeans have sort of gone to Ukraine and tried to say, listen, we really need you to help make a deal with Hungary and like unblock this 90 billion because it's a difficult problem to resolve. I think that Ukraine basically said no, like they're not willing to fix the pipeline to bring Russian gas into Hungary and oil. So that's resulted in the EU now. This is kind of the update where we're kind of caught up. The Europeans have said in a couple of different ways that they're going to find a way to deal with this problem. Regardless of whether Hungary and Slovakia are going to block it, I should say. They're already not participating. That was part of the way that it was going to move forward to begin with, is that they got a carve out. But if they do continue blocking it, we're going to come up with another mechanism to solve this problem. That has resulted in, so far, a plan right now, as far as I understand, to provide 30 billion in bilateral loans. This is from the Baltic countries and the Nordic countries, it said. and that's almost a year of funding for Ukraine. Most people said it was about 6 months of funding. So I wouldn't necessarily call that a comprehensive solution to the existing problem, which is like for the next about probably 2 years, but arguably the foreseeable future. Ukraine needs serious budgetary help to sustain their government. But this is a way that the EU can buy time to try to come up with another mechanism. But I think to say that the problem is solved, I'll put it this way. Both von der Leyen and Macron this week have said that the Ukraine is going to get support. And like I believe them. Like based on like my hot take is I believe what they're saying. I don't think that anyone who's tried to follow this issue to the best of their ability, like me, would believe that that's not true. I think it's true. The issue is that Ukraine needs money sooner rather than later. This problem has been postponed too long already. The discussion of the Russian assets lasted for a really long time. And then finally, they came up with this alternative, which took another, I want to say 3 months is when we first heard about it to the time that it was passed. And now it's being blocked anyway. But this is like an alternative to an alternative, right? That we have to now come up with. So it's going to take time and it's going to be an issue for Ukraine. Like Ukraine needs budgetary support basically immediately. This problem was, people were aware of this problem like a year and a half ago. And it took that long to come up with this solution. And so that's my concern is they now have 6 months to come up with a more comprehensive solution than the one they presented so far. But I'm pretty confident they will. But yeah, it's like one of those situations where we thought everything was kind of resolved and then this happened. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is I think a lot of people are hoping that Hungary, like Orban losing the election, will change Hungary's stance on this. The issue is Slovakia has said they'll consider also blocking it if Orban loses the election. So, this doesn't look like an immediately solvable problem. The issue is this was a pretty elegant solution to indirectly using the Russian assets because they're under the governance of the EU, I guess you could say. We'll put it that way. That was the elegance of this solution. As far as I know, there's not a good legislative mechanism in the EU to borrow money without unanimous approval. Like this was the legal mechanism they used for a reason. So that leaves the final alternative, which we talked about at the time when I was going around saying, hey, Ukraine needs, at least $40 billion this year, or they're going to, I don't know if collapse is the right word, but like they won't be able to function with a normal civilian government anymore. The other mechanism that was floated was private bilateral loans. And that's where we're left. But then we no longer have the instrument of the Russian assets. Belgium isn't going to issue private loans because, as we've already said, they don't want to be legally on the hook. The EU needs to be legally on the hook. That's their point. So yeah, this is like a huge snowballing problem that's been building for like almost 2 years now. I really hope it gets resolved. It's really important. I want to say it's kind of the most important issue until it gets resolved. But that's kind of my general summary of the current state of the situation. Does anyone have anything they want to add or correct me on? I'm not an authority on this. Yeah, so did my best, chat. If you guys have any questions, I'll do my best to answer. But again, by no means an expert. I've been doing my best to follow this as a news story for the last year and a half or so. Yeah, I'll do my best to keep you guys updated on it. But right now, I would say the situation's a bit concerning. It's great that some countries have stepped up and given 30 billion, or there's discussion that there will be 30 billion available to Ukraine in bilateral aid to solve the immediate 6-month problem. By the way, I read in an article, I don't know if this is for sure true, but that around April is when Ukraine starts kind of needing the money to actually kind of flow in. Yeah, that's kind of the general situation. They now got 6 more months. So, May, June, July, August, September, October. They got till October before it becomes a serious issue. So that's pretty much it for that. There's a few other things I got. Humanoid robots. This week, Ukraine said they tested 2 humanoid robots in frontline scenarios. I don't know. I think that they mentioned that the results were pretty good. I guess we could just really quickly talk about some of what I think are kind of the limitations of the technology as of now. I think right now it's unlikely we'll see like Terminator robots, I guess we'll call it, just because the technology hasn't really matured yet. We are seeing for the first time, like maybe at the end of this year, like consumer grade humanoid robot models. But as far as I'm aware, in terms of the consumer side of the technology, it's still the actual ability for these things to do tasks autonomously is really questionable. First, the battery life is not great. It's not easy to have like a bipedal robot like this and preserve, like have enough energy for it to last a long time. So I want to say even the more expensive models can only last a few hours. Doesn't make it a deal breaker, but these aren't things that you can just like set into the wild for extended periods of time. Like you could with an FPV drone, for example. And part of the issue is that these guys are like the way humans work, right? We're constantly falling. That's just how our bodies like stay upright. So that takes energy. There's an energy cost to just standing around as a humanoid robot. There's obviously ways around it. You can kind of collapse into a little ball if you're a robot, but in general, this kind of method of having a bipedal human is pretty difficult to do. The other issue is that right now, the way that these things work, the way that they are able to articulate to this degree, they rely on servo motors. And servo motors are like little motors. And right now, a lot of the consumer grade stuff, outside of some very specific industrial applications, they can lift literally 2 to 3 kilograms. So everything below an industrial grade robot, like, that basically costs right now about $100,000. And again, we still have power issues. These things are built to work in a factory, not like be on a rugged battlefield, basically. These things those ones can lift 30 kilograms. So, better, but again, not fit for purpose. They optimize that over everything else. So the problem is, again, like if you're a human, lifting stuff up makes you tired. Like that's a little servo motor in its elbow or whatever. And when you have to lift something heavy, it kind of burns out, and then you're screwed. So they're only able to lift very light things, and especially when they have like these delicate hands and stuff. So and then I guess the last thing is autonomous control. As of now, there's been pretty I guess inconsistent results when it comes to it's possible to train them for very specific tasks, but it's more like it requires a lot of input. A lot of the time you need a person to remote control it. Like someone puts on like VR glasses and a little gloves and has them do it, right? So they're not like autonomous meaningfully yet. So, I'm sure that the militaries have access to technology that's probably, 10 years ahead or something of what other, civilians have access to, and they've got more money. But I think fundamentally the reason we saw FPV drones or, quadcopter drones, I don't know what you want to call them, take off, especially for this particular war, where you have 2 states that are kind of strained economically, just trying to come up with cost-effective solutions. Those were already a mature technology on the consumer side, and they were able to take that base technology that was already usable and start like evolving it and iterating on it. Whereas with these robots, I think we're seeing the very beginning of the consumer grade of these robots, and it's going to take a while for specialized motors that don't burn out easily, for, like they need to integrate all these systems into a more meaningful package before we're going to see autonomous military robots. I'm sure I'll be eating my words in like 3 years or something, but I think that right now there's a lot of tasks in the military that can be done semi-autonomously, particularly when it comes to logistics. I wouldn't be surprised if you see these things work in a warehouse or something, or maybe even like load a gun or like a cannon, a big artillery piece or something. But in general, I don't expect these guys to be like holding the trench anytime soon, personally. But I'm curious if anyone else has any like hot takes on this.
It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Putting a lot of effort and energy into trying to introduce a humanoid robot versus, for instance, a UGV style concept, which I think is probably much easier to...
Right, like a tracked or wheeled vehicle, right?
Yeah, something either tracked or maybe it can do more complex operations than most UGVs with some arms and stuff. Sometimes you need these kind of you need to be able to do more human-like things on the battlefield to maybe clear rubble, do certain operations in a very, very dangerous environment. But I don't see a humanoid thing being... I think it's too complicated, and the risk is that you're not going to make it work effectively, and you're spending a lot of time and effort on something that could be much easily achieved with more or less existing proven concepts like UGVs.
Yeah, I think in most cases, like you said, like a ground vehicle, right? If you need just something to shoot a machine gun, it doesn't have to look like a human and do that stuff. Basically, the only reason you would want this is because you need something that, as you said, is able to replace very specific human tasks that need versatility. So, the technology needs to mature to the point where it can actually meaningfully replace a human that needs to do the human things before it's necessary. Otherwise, like you said, it's better to just strap whatever you need to a UGV in a lot of cases, I think. Just because, it's the more versatile you make something like this, a technology like this, the more difficult it is. It becomes exponentially more difficult. It's better to just purpose build it for the thing you need most of the time, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's our hot take on ground robots. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll be wrong, and Ukraine will crack this just like they cracked drones, and certainly solve a huge manpower issue. So good luck. And I don't think the Russians have even begun to experiment with anything like this. So, it does at least show that the Ukrainians are trying everything they can to be innovative. And I think they still have a bit of an edge when it comes to technologies like this. So, cool. Okay, next topic is the Wild Hornets. Our friends, we're not that close with them, but we interviewed them once back in the before time. So the Wild Hornets have been having a bit of a ride in the media, and I thought we'd just come out and I don't know. I'm going to do my best to, I guess, defend them. So first, on Fox News recently, on Gutfield, they were talking about American drone innovations, and like right at the bottom of the screen, there's a big thing that's like American drone innovations, and like the B-roll they picked, the footage they picked to show to demonstrate, American innovation in drones was Wild Hornets videos. And again, like we've interviewed these guys. This is not an American. This is very much a Ukrainian effort. It is a completely grassroots effort. These are dudes with Bamboo Lab printers that have been making Ukrainian drones, and obviously their operations gotten way more sophisticated since we interviewed them. But they've been responsible in recent times for actually some pretty cutting edge technology in terms of Ukrainian drones and interceptors. But this is I just want to make clear, this is very much a Ukrainian effort, and we know that for 100% for sure. And it has nothing to do with American drone innovation. So the Wild Hornets, of course, gave a cheeky response and said, the footage had Wild Hornets at least just right in the bottom center of the screen, so it's very clear who it was. they issued a little statement that basically just said, "Hey, just want to let everyone know, like we're Ukrainian. We're not we're not an American drone company innovating." And I would say it was a bit embarrassing for Fox News. And apparently, Airline said they issued a retraction. I haven't seen that personally, but I believe them. It'd be the responsible thing to do, or not a retraction, but just a correction that like they it was silly for them to use that footage, basically an admission. And yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with showing it, but I think it would have. It was just the context it was presented in was clearly bad. It was embarrassing, I think, for if anything, for Fox. And I would say arguably like it was good. The Wild Hornets got some publicity out of it. So I think they played the whole situation well. They've done their best to represent themselves. And it's one of the good things in the age of social media that they have their own channel to just come out with a statement like this and say, hey, we appreciate the shout out, but we're a Ukrainian company, not an American company, and like they can get some traction, right? So, it's not like a past age where if the media just said something about you, you could say, hey, that's not true, but like, what do you do, right? So it's maybe one of the benefits of like social media, and we always talk about the drawbacks. But anyway, I think that's it for that particular part. Erlen, anything about this?
Well, no, I thought maybe these news about the Aramco things, or
yeah, that's next. So
I think that's a little bit more important right now.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing is a lot of this, I would say, is my interpretation. I will completely cop to the fact that I have not read the article itself. I've only seen people talking about the article because I don't have a Wall Street Journal subscription and I'm not getting one. Just making that clear. But I do know there's some verifiable stuff. So the first is Wall Street Journal released an article that said that Ukraine and in particular the Wild Hornets were in, quote, intense negotiations with the Saudi-controlled oil company Aramco about interceptor drones. Now, a couple things to take note of. Number one, the Ukrainian government has made it very clear that there is an export restriction on weapons until, for the duration of the war. I think should be common sense to anyone why that exists. Ukraine needs equipment for themselves because they're in an existential war, right? Now, that said, there are possibilities to get licenses. So it's not completely crazy for a company to be in negotiations with a foreign business entity, but I don't think that they would, there's no indication that any government permission was given at this point to export specific drones. So I would just say right now, on the face of it, I thought logically that doesn't make a lot of sense that Wild Hornets would be in negotiations. So then Wild Hornets issued a response to that article, and they basically said, hey, just want to make clear, like, that's not happening. And then they referenced that we're going to basically do everything in compliance with Ukrainian law. So in other words, like, they themselves said, no, we're not doing that because we like to follow Ukrainian laws, right? They didn't kind of make that direct connection. It's not that the very act of negotiating would be against the law. I think that it would be fair for them to like make a negotiation and then go to the Ukrainian government, ask for permission. But it just seems like it feels like the Wall Street Journal is accusing them of something adjacent to a crime. And I'm not sure that they got their input, and they're kind of denying it. And Saudi Aramco is also denying it. So I just want to like make that and again, this is all based on just an anonymous source that claimed it from Wall Street Journal. So, look, I'm not an expert. I'm not a better journalist than people at the Wall Street Journal, but I've interviewed these guys, or I've helped interview these guys. And I feel like they've been done a little dirty here. And it just seems like the Wall Street Journal is saying something that goes against logic on the basis of a completely anonymous source with nothing else substantiating it. And I've seen kind of a lot of that reporting from the Wall Street Journal lately. It's all based on statements from anonymous sources. And I don't know. It just for me, it puts into question a lot of the Wall Street Journal's reporting lately, because they use that technique a lot, where they just say some government insider said something, and sometimes that can be a useful avenue for reporting, but I think that really good journalism would try to substantiate it with more than that. And like, government officials can say lots of things, and they say things sometimes on purpose to media outlets, just to kind of get a narrative out there or throw them off or whatever. So or they say things in a very like specific legal way, where they're still technically telling the truth, they haven't lied, but they're able to kind of sidestep the issue, right? Something like that. So I don't know, just for me, a bit of a iffy story from the Wall Street Journal. Not trying to start a feud with the Wall Street Journal or anything. But yeah, and as far as I know, they didn't approach Wild Hornets or Saudi Aramco for comment, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. So go ahead.
One comment about this is that in general, responsible reporting, especially when you're talking about a country that has been at war for 11 years and under a full-scale invasion for more than 4 years, which is literally fighting for its survival, and you have companies that are grassroots movements, but that are also very, very vital components to the defense of the country. These kind of news could potentially hurt these companies that are quite fragile, in the sense they don't have a big corporation backing them, making sure that that they are stable. They're stable because they have volunteers around them all the time, right? And let's say that someone is investigated for some crime, like, for instance, engaging in illegal sales of weapons outside the country during war. That can affect something that is a very positive effort and create problems. And obviously, this, in theory, could impact the Wild Hornets' ability to supply drones to the frontline units, and also to the very important interceptor crews that are using a lot of these drones. They are not the only supplier, far from it, but they are one of the more successful and also one of the most used drones in intercepting Shahed drones and also other drones. So this could, in theory, affect Ukraine's ability to defend itself, and that's why being a responsible journalist is very important in these situations.
Yeah, and I as you said, it bears repeating. Like, in a normal circumstance, if a story like this popped up, I would just be like, well, I don't know the Wild Hornets that well, but like, we've interviewed them, we've talked to them, and as Erlen said, like, they're just some people that like saw their country get invaded, and they said, well, this drone stuff seems like we need it to survive, and they got 10 3D printers together and started printing drones and made it work. And then people said, hey, your drones are pretty good. And then they got 100, and then I think they got attacked by Russia, and they were like, maybe we should get a basement somewhere. And like, it really is like a story of just they're definitely not a big corporation that has access to the same like resources. And as you said, like, for a big media organization like the Wall Street Journal to claim something like this about them, when again, like, Ukrainian law is pretty clear on the matter, they're kind of vulnerable. And I really hope that I don't know, so far it seems to be all working out in their favor. They're getting a lot of press, and they're like, because of all these mistakes the media is making about them, they're getting a lot of press, and they're able to get their own narrative out, I think, pretty well about what's going on. So I mean, that's good for them. But hopefully they don't see any like consequences from the Ukrainian government, as you said, as a result of this kind of reporting. Cool. So I think that's pretty much it for that. Is there anything else you want to add about that, Erland, or should we move on?
Well, I just wanted to kind of remind people that we see a lot of reports on potential Ukrainian drone sales to the Middle East or to the US for intercepting Shaheds specifically, or long-range attack drones. And I just wanted to remind people that these drones by itself are not going to intercept anything. You need highly trained personnel in many different trades. So everything from surveillance to basically predicting where you should launch drones, studying the patterns of the Russian in this case, the Iranian drone operators. You need a lot of very highly trained personnel, and you also need a lot of other components as well, which in this case, I don't think they're going to have difficulty getting access to, but they are still scarce on the market. Like counter UAS drone radars is not something you could just say, okay, I want 1,000 of these tomorrow and get them delivered a week after. So even though I think it's very positive that Ukraine is getting the attention from not just the Middle East, but also other countries that are interested in buying and cooperating with Ukraine on this technology and this set of skills. People should be a little bit cautious when it comes to the optimism of great success immediately happening. And I hope that the people that are, or the countries, entities that are inquiring about this, that need these drones to defend or need more drone defenses right now, I hope they are realistic about their expectations, because it doesn't take just the drones to do the work.
Yeah, it's a really important point. It took Ukraine a long time to develop not only the actual equipment, but like this set of skills needed to do this. And we have a colleague that studies the topic, and it's a huge topic. It's really, as Erlen said, it's like it's not easy to intercept these drones, and Ukraine was getting pummeled by Shaheds, and stuff on the scale that in Iran, there was a big density of attacks from Iran, but compared to the scale of what Ukraine's dealt with in terms of day to day, the Ukrainians have been shooting down Shaheds for a long time, and it's very difficult. And it took them a long time to get this technology in a state where it was effective, and it's still not a mature technology, I would say, or a set of skills. Like they're still working on it to get the to increase the capability to do it. So but yeah, I think Erlen's absolutely right that it takes skilled personnel, and you have to deconflict airspace, meaning they have to be able to get up there and do it, and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's not a simple matter. You can't just order a crate of Ukrainian interceptor drones and you're safe. It's much more complicated than that. And I think as President Zelensky said, that really that fact, what Erlen mentioned, it requires skilled personnel and expertise. That is one reason why Ukraine's going to be kind of ahead on this drone stuff for a long time, because it's the equipment itself is less expensive in a lot of cases than the systems that were devised before them, but it requires a specialized skill set that countries have to invest in to actually acquire it. It's not a simple matter. And I don't know. I think people saying they don't need Ukraine's help might be speaking a little prematurely. I don't know if you feel the same way, Erlen.
Yeah, and I just want to say that that kind of knowledge sometimes is much more worth than the hardware itself, and also the monetary value of sales. And I hope that Western allies appreciate that, and also rewards Ukraine for that. We are learning a lot of things from Ukraine when it comes to not just drone warfare, but also general modern warfare and air defense. And we should be acknowledging that this value is much more important than just the money that a simple air defense missile or asset costs.
Yeah, I think, Ukraine's partners should never forget that this knowledge was hard for Ukraine to acquire. Like, the lessons came at a huge cost, and I really hope that they're willing to reflect that in any help that they receive from Ukraine while Ukraine is fighting a war. But Ukraine seems to be open to the idea, at least. Obviously, they're going to try to make it work within their own system because it would really be beneficial for the Ukrainians to have a good relationship. To kind of, right now, I would argue that most of these Gulf countries have been somewhat neutral in the war between Ukraine and Russia. They certainly haven't, been helping Russia explicitly, but they've kind of looked the other way when the Russians are trying to acquire, sanctions evasion stuff or, things like that. But they've also, some countries have been instrumental in like prisoner exchanges and things like that. So I would argue their position's been mostly neutral. But I think that Ukraine recognizes that by maybe providing some help to these Gulf countries, that they've been mostly fair, at least in their neutrality, and that would maybe get them some benefits in terms of dealing with Russian banking sanctions evasion and other types of technology sanctions evasion and stuff like that. And yeah, it seems like a good strategy if Ukraine can make it work without any disruption to their own military needs, right? Okay, so next up is just a little bit of housekeeping, but worth doing. So the first is just a quick announcement that Google, we often complain about when YouTube doesn't always treat us super fair. We use regular news footage, and they say that we're like promoting violence and stuff. It's certainly not our intention. We're just trying to report the news, and sometimes we use footage from other media agencies that are on YouTube, and I presume not penalized, and they say that it's like not allowed. So we aren't always on the best relations with YouTube, but lately things have been good, and I just wanted to recognize that they've been good to us lately, and also that they recently granted our YouTube channel nonprofit status, which is great. Tochnyi is a nonprofit. We try to support independent research about the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and doing our best. And it's great that YouTube and Google have recognized the work that our researchers do, and just thanks to them. And then I think we recently, Erlen, did we publish a new article, or should I say Daniela published a new article on the website, or is that not out yet? And I just made a
no, it's not out yet, but there is something brewing that is very big, and that's I think very probably coming out this week.
Okay, yeah. So I guess tune into our or check out our Twitter or Blue Sky, and I think we'll make an announcement if we publish this week. So,
but yeah, we did publish a Cerdo published a kind of new form of content on the website. It's sort of a brief Orbat or unit rotation update, and go check it out. I'm not going to reveal what it is, because it's if I bring it up on the screen, it's kind of doing a bad service towards this article. So go check it out. In the sense that people should actually click the link and open the article.
Okay, yeah. So check out Tochnyi.info, guys. It's a great website. Lots of articles already published there. We got interactive maps. We got a lot of important research going on. So I think it's worth checking out. Okay, I think that's all my topics. There's a huge, exhausting array of topics. The last thing I'll point out is we are looking for a social media manager because of all this stuff we need to promote from our researchers. So if you're interested in helping to manage some of our social media accounts, we're not the best at updating all that stuff, and it would be good to have a dedicated person to help with that. So you can apply on the website if you're interested. Thanks for your consideration. So now I think we come to Q&A. We've got our first question that I can see. I think very briefly, someone asked, presumably before we talked about it, or maybe they missed it. What was the blackout in Moscow? Was it real, and for how long? Yes, it was real, just briefly, because we already discussed it previously. You can rewind to the beginning of Stanimir's segment. Yes, it's real. It's been going on for about a week, and it's real, at least in this, that we've heard Russians complaining about it. So I mean, they're definitely talking about it. I haven't been there to experience it myself, but it doesn't seem fake. They're definitely it's worth remarking upon for the locals. So I think that says something. So the next question is, it's been reported that Storm Shadow production has restarted in the UK. Is this true? Are they producing new missiles or restoring old ones? And are these specifically for Ukraine? I guess Colby, do you know anything about that?
So last summer, the UK and France both announced that they were going to be procuring more Storm Shadows and Scalp-EGs, respectively, to bolster their own national stocks. I don't have any information. They did not release any information about the scope of these orders, as far as I know. Perhaps in France's case, there might be some information in their budget documents. I don't know if we have any French speakers who want to go look for that information, because I've been asking this question, and I don't think that we know how many France ordered last summer. Certainly, we don't know how many the UK has ordered. To the best of my knowledge, again, I mean, the UK is very opaque about these things. So unless there was a response provided during question period to this, if the question was asked. So yeah, I don't think we have very many details about this, whether it's even happening or not. It would not surprise me, especially in the case of the UK, if they said they were going to do this and they haven't actually issued any contracts. As far as I'm aware, doing this would not have been easy for MBDA UK with their current order backlog and the state of their production facilities. Restarting new production would not have been a trivial endeavor. So it would have been a substantial investment that would have been required to make this a worthwhile endeavor to restart production. So answer, maybe. They said they were going to, but that has not been validated yet. That said, obviously Ukraine has received some new deliveries of these missiles. That was publicly reported back in last autumn, and obviously we've seen a number of Storm Shadow, Scalp-EG fire missions executed quite recently. So Ukraine definitely has gotten more missiles, so perhaps that lends credence to the idea that they at least have more missiles coming in the production queue, because they'd be more willing to part with more stocks if they felt they were in a better position to replace those missiles in the future. So certainly possible, but less certainty than we would like.
Yeah, thanks, Colby, for that answer. So someone asked, have the humanoid robots been trained to operate assault rifles yet? As far as I know, no. I haven't seen an assault rifle in the hand of a human robot. I've definitely seen the little doggy robots with a little cannon on top, or like a little gun on top of them. And I've seen, ground vehicles like wheels or tracks with machine guns mounted on them, like autonomous ones, or piloted remotely. But yeah, I haven't seen any of the humanoid ones. I as far as I know, it wasn't made clear what their tasks were up there exactly, those two test models. Presumably they're mostly just seeing what they can do, like what human tasks could feasibly or theoretically be replaced. But I don't know. But I would doubt, it would be difficult for them to hold an assault rifle. I'll put it that way. The energy cost would be kind of high. They've got to hold it kind of up, and then they've got to, it's heavy. Like an assault rifle is pretty heavy. So yeah, I don't know. Colby, Erlen, have you seen any humanoid robots with assault rifles?
Just sloppy Chinese AI videos.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to watch out for all that AI stuff, man. It's really getting crazy. I will say, Twitter had a good policy recently where they are now taking the revenue away from, deep fake AI stuff, and they're giving it to the other people And I think they've said something like $350 million was already redistributed to people. So hopefully that'll disincentivize it a little bit. But there's always going to be kind of misinformation. There's always going to be old footage being circulated as new, and claims by either side that something happened, because that's the exciting stuff that gets the clicks, right? So it's going to be difficult. It's important to be wary of all that stuff, especially in this day and age when we're seeing conflicts intensify, I guess you could say. So there's an article alleging that China is now producing shot heads for Russia or Iran. Is there any truth to that? As far as I'm aware, I haven't seen any direct proof. But Erland, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there's been numerous outlets and analysts claiming this, but we haven't seen direct proof, I would say. Although I would say that it is likely or highly likely that Russia is acquiring parts or maybe even components that have been prefabricated in China and that they're being assembled in Russia.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Like the Chinese are probably doing everything they can short of supplying them with actual weapons. They're giving like if they could, they would sell everything in a big box with instructions on how to assemble it. But they're doing their best to avoid sanctions. They're still cautious about that. But so my guess would be they're not sending fully assembled shot heads just for that one reason. But beyond that, I think that they're, I assume they're taking money for it. It's not that they're just helping them, to out of the kindness of their hearts or something. But yeah, they're a huge reason why Russia's able to make these weapons. For sure, they're providing a lot of the parts.
Yep. I assume most of the motors are being manufactured in China, for instance.
Yeah, I assume so. Okay, so I think even if Ukraine needs them themselves, it makes a lot of sense to sell them as it can increase production capability. Yeah, so we're talking about drones here. Basically, Ukraine has what they've described as underinvestment in their, arms production sector. So they've claimed that, I want to say, about $5 billion short. In other words, they have the capacity, if they had the investment from either an outside partner or from the Ukrainian government or whoever, to produce about $5 billion worth more of defense equipment. And in theory, if, let's say, an Arab country in the Gulf is willing to provide, investment in Ukraine's defense sector, that could theoretically benefit both Ukraine and that country. So on paper, this could work, and I think that it's something that the Ukrainian government is looking into. But I don't think that there is a mature or like a fully developed plan. This all kind of hit Ukraine at once, right? Like a few weeks ago, none of this mattered. All of a sudden, all these countries are approaching them. I assume, on some level, this has been widely reported by the media. I'm not suggesting that specific companies are talking to other specific companies, but I do think it's true that a lot of these countries are expressing interest in Ukrainian interceptor drone technology and presumably the expertise that comes with it. And this is all hitting the Ukrainian government a little fast. And I think the Ukrainians are fine providing the materials, the equipment. As this commenter mentioned, they have the ability right now to put out more stuff, in the defense sector. But as Erland correctly pointed out, and as the president of Ukraine correctly pointed out, that stuff is not all that useful without expert knowledge. And I assume that is needed in Ukraine. And there's not like an abundance or like a excess amount of it. They have probably not enough even for their defense needs as it stands. And they're trying to acquire more. And that it's going to be difficult to peel off some of that knowledge and expertise and send it over to the Gulf to explain how all this stuff works. So that's the difficulty here. And I don't think the Ukrainians have ruled it out. I think they're definitely looking at any opportunities because, it makes sense for them to do so. But I think that they're still in the stage of planning and trying to understand how to approach the problem. And we're not at the stage where they're able to just immediately come up with a policy and implement it and start making contracts yet. And so I think, in a few weeks to a month, I assume, the Ukrainians usually move fast when stuff's important like this. So I assume we'll see some kind of framework, but I don't think we've seen the framework yet from the government. And when we do, private companies will definitely move in, and they've got the production capacity. But that expertise question is the difficulty, I think. Okay, so next question. If anyone had any input on that. Okay, did my best, chatter. So next question is: are you aware of any of information on the types of components or industrial components that the Kyiv L plant was producing? It's difficult to assess how replaceable their stuff is, given the vague info most news sources provide. I'm pretty sure they provide missile components. I am just saying this off the top of my head. But I've reported on Ukraine has struck that place like countless times, and when they do, I have to give a little spiel about it. And what's replaying in my head is that it produces components for missiles, and I want to say also electronic warfare equipment. So I would say that that's pretty important, irreplaceable stuff. It's electronic warfare equipment and missile targeting computers generally are not like easy to replace with consumer grade technology. That said, there's been a lot of Western components found even in Russian like missiles and stuff. It like there is definitely a pipeline of Western technology going into Russian weapons, and a lot of it's like microchips and things like that. So I think that Russia could still supply its military with this level of technology, even if Kyiv L is destroyed, or Kyiv EL. But it would raise the price for them a lot. I think that's like the issue, and it would be difficult to replicate the technology that they lost. Like they could theoretically do it, but civilian technology or like dual use technology, whatever you want to call it, the stuff they're able to easily import isn't quite as sophisticated. So yeah, I think that's it. Erlen, do you happen to have any insight on what Kyiv L produces?
Well, no more than what is written in this Militarny article. And they state that Kyiv EL was the second largest manufacturer of microelectronics in Russia, and that about 90% of the production is supplied to the Russian Ministry of Defense, and that basically anything from missiles to radar components. I don't know, Stanimir, wasn't there a statement from one of the factory directors a few years ago saying like that without this factory, there is enormous amounts of weapons that cannot exist, or something like this?
I don't remember that. If there have been, I've missed it. I have to point out that, yeah, the largest one would be Element in Russia. And in terms of replacing such forms of technology, if we can look at the issue they have now with replacing their optic fiber production, they've now shifted the timeline for the replacement of that to 2028, and the factory was hit in the start of 2025 in the first half. So this can be used as a benchmark for how easy it is for them to replace high-tech facilities.
Yeah, like I don't think it would stop the Russian missile program or Russian missile attacks in their tracks, but it would be a pretty big deal if Ukraine was able to really meaningfully, like stop this facility from producing stuff, because the Russians have been able to produce like what they're now they've basically not used up all their stockpiles, but they've like drained it to the point where they don't want to drain anymore. So they're relying on high production numbers to keep up the Russian attacks on Ukraine, and any disruption to that would be kind of significant for, I think, Ukraine. Hopefully Ukraine's able to hit it meaningfully with one of the new missiles that are coming online for them. It's been a very difficult circumstance for Ukraine, the strategic war, where Russia's been able to launch tons and tons of missiles and drones at Ukraine, and they have limited interceptors, and they're not really able to strike back. And that striking back is so important in this type of a fight. So, yep. Okay, there is. Let's see. France said it will produce or provide Ukraine with an updated SAMP-T system to test against ballistic missiles this year during a visit with Macron. Do we have any insight on this? I did see that he mentioned that. It's definitely worth mentioning, so thanks for bringing it up. I don't have any further information on it, though. I think it's good. Obviously, SAMP-T needs like a lot of, I assume like having that testing will be crucial both for SAMP-T to increase its effectiveness, and also it will help Ukraine. So it's like a win-win. So I think it's a good thing. I've just lost Colby. I was going to have him talk about SAMP-T, but oh well. Yeah. So I think that's hopefully that question. Erlen, do you know anything about this SAMP-T?
Well, the thing is, the new SAMP-T NG system is supposedly considerably better at intercepting ballistic missiles on paper. But as we know, these things need to be field tested. And France have said several times that they will supply Ukraine with one of these. I think what Ukraine is trying to make happen is to expedite the delivery so that it happens before the schedule, basically. Because I know that Zelensky went to France, I think last week, and there was a report that on the schedule he would bring up this topic. So probably they were trying to make France deliver it before.
Yeah, it seems like a reasonable logic. Okay, I think the next question is for Stanimir, which is if you talk about Russian companies selling their assets to obtain cash, who buys the assets and what's the source of their cash?
Usually they're being bought by bigger Russian oligarchs, and the source of their cash is monetizing their close connections to the Kremlin. We saw that when it came to the purchase of the Domodedovo airport. We're going to see it again when they sell Uralzlato. So usually it's people who are close to the Kremlin who have the ability who have monetized their relations to the Kremlin and have gotten contracts and now are using that to expand their portfolio.
Yeah, I think like a good example of this from my experience, because you had me read a script that you wrote about the Russian housing industry, right? Is one of those Russian companies basically asked the government for a bailout. The Russian government said no. They started selling to another bigger Russian construction company that I presume would get a bailout if they needed it. So that's it's like a consolidation that's happening that's being, I guess, like kind of dictated by the state. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes, but in this case, I think you're mistaking the two companies. One of them was Samolet, and it's independent. The other one was Etalon, and Etalon's parent company, Africa Sistema, actually managed to infuse it with cash and sell one of its good assets to them so that they can resell parts of it and raise more capital for better construction sites.
Okay, yeah, maybe it's not the best specific example. It's the Russian construction industry confused me a bit when I was trying to go through that script. But yeah, I think it's Stanimir's answer is probably better than mine. So thank you, Chatter, for your question. Next, let's see. Not sure what this question is. Shouldn't be the first thing a Southern U.S.-based company would train them to do. So if you could clarify the question, we'll do our best to answer it. And then next question is from Mr. J.J. Jones. Says, has there been news about testing in Ukraine of a new IRIS-T capable of reliably intercepting ballistic missiles? And could this solve the lack of Patriots or PAC-3? So we'll maybe save this question for next week for Mr. German Aid to Ukraine. I think he's presumably studied the issue in far better detail than us. I think the basic answer is that right now, I don't think that Germany is producing enough interceptors or they haven't been producing interceptors long enough to have a stockpile big enough, however you want to look at it, to like
Well,
fully address their needs. But go ahead, Erlen.
well, no, so I think there's a bit of confusion here. There's no new version of IRIS-T in Ukraine, but there's been rumors about possible use of the normal IRIS-T launchers and radars, where they have been able to intercept some ballistic missiles. But I think we're talking about S-300 air defense missiles being used in a ballistic attack role. There is an IRIS-T SLX being developed and tested, I think, right now, but I'm not sure if Ukraine is going to receive that, if that's even in the plans. But we'll ask Gao if you can talk about that next week, I guess. It is just completely unrealistic to believe that IRIS-T can replace or even in any way or form remedy the problems with the lack of PAC-3 interceptors. It is not the same kind of system. It's not even in the same category.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. And just to go down the rabbit hole real quick of S-300 ballistic launches. So Russia has the S-300. It's an air defense system. They made a bajillion of these missiles, back in the Soviet time, and so they've got tons of them. They've had high production forever, and so basically in some random Soviet manual somewhere, there was some passage that was like, we think you could maybe throw these like a ballistic missile. And so the Russians pretty quickly needed way more standoff munitions than they had ever needed, since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Oh, go ahead.
Can I add that the S-300 actually had a native ground attack capability in itself, but what they did is that they improved it and basically has modified some missiles in order to have GPS guidance systems on board. I don't think this has been at all effective, and the rate that they expend and also lost enormous amount of interceptor for S-300 in Ukrainian attacks on munition storages probably put an end to experimenting further with this. But they still do sometimes use the S-300 in an attack role, very rarely though. But it was always there. I think it's been a function they've had since the Soviet times.
I've seen regular reports up to the war of up to the full-scale invasion of units drilling for ground attacks. So it's been something that they've kept on.
Yeah, well, there you go. It's a capability they've cultivated in their air defense system to say, well, also it's a ballistic missile. But I think, as Erlen kind of pointed out, it is in a semantic sense a ballistic missile. It's a missile with a ballistic trajectory, and they have tried to modify and put guidance systems on it, but it doesn't really compare in effectiveness to a purpose-built ballistic missile. And that's why I think Erlen was saying that this new IRIS-T, I guess, software update or whatever you want to call it, that could deal with this specific problem, I think it's possible for them to maybe intercept those, but maybe not a more purpose-built missile, I think is what Erlen was saying. Is that accurate, Erlen?
Yeah, and I think it has to do, probably, I'm not an expert at all, but from what I understand, it has to do with the terminal velocity of the S-300 when it is in ground attack role, which is considerably less than Iskander missile.
Right. Generally, with a ballistic missile, the idea is to get it up real high, and then by the time it's coming down, it's going down so quick that you can't really intercept it. That's kind of why they're and also, of course, the angle of the threat is different and stuff. But that's one of the reasons that a ballistic missile is such a big threat, and it's difficult for countries to develop a piece of technology that can stop a ballistic missile, because they go real fast because they get up real high. To simplify it, I wish John was here. So yeah, that's, I think, the best answer we can do with this IRIS-T stuff. And what we'll talk to Germany to Ukraine next week, and maybe he's got some further insight on it. Next is, has there been any increased production for Aster 30 missiles? Colby has left us, and I have no idea. I'm going to ask Erlen, but I don't know. Erlen, did you know?
Yes, the Aster 30 and Aster 30 NT, which is the new variant, has some like the production has been scaling up somewhat over the years, and there has been allocated some funds recently to this as well, but we're talking about quantities that is unable to satisfy the need both for domestic or for Western allies that use these interceptors natively in their air defense systems, both on the SAMP-T, but also specifically on frigates and larger ships. So the upscale that is needed for a steady supply of interceptors to Ukraine is still far away, it seems to me. And also, there's a big difference between the Aster 30 and Aster 30 NT, and the new missile NT is on paper as well considerably more capable of intercepting ballistic missiles if accompanied with the new SAMP-T NG. So we're still in a phase where there is promising technology that has been developed, finished, that the development is finished, but we don't see scale production of it. So that's pretty much where I am. I don't have specific information about the numbers. I just known from people in Tochnyi that is researching this, and also other analysts that are watching this has stated numerous times that the production capabilities is way too low for the needs.
And Thierry adds that the Astra 30 production rate has been increased, but not only for Ukraine, also for French systems and Italian systems and Navy vessels that operate in the Red Sea.
Yeah, I think there are more customers for the Aster 30 on naval than just France and Italy. So yeah, there is a pretty substantial customer base in theory for the Aster.
And Colby added that he just posted about Aster 30 on Twitter. So yeah, check out. He lagged out. It's all right, Colby. But yeah, check out Colby's Twitter. I think he gives good updates on stuff like this. Like I said, without Colby, I wouldn't have known. I would have been like $14 million. I don't care. But that, yeah, it was a great clarification. So Colby's Twitter's a good place to learn stuff about defense procurement and things like that. Cool. So I think, oh man, Mr. Gao's here. Mr. Gao, real quick, we had a question about Iris-T. Yeah, did you want to answer it? Go ahead.
No, I didn't see it. I just knew there was a reason. Something told me to come, and apparently I was right. So please, what was the question?
Wow.
So basically, the question was about Iris-T capability of intercepting ballistic missiles, and also if there is the new variant, that Iris-T SLX, is being deployed in Ukraine already.
Okay, so for the SLX, no, it's not deployed in Ukraine, and as far as I know, it's not planned for the foreseeable future. And also, people should not think that SLX is a solution for intercepting ballistic missiles on a regular basis. It's certainly better than SLM in intercepting ballistic missiles, but it's meant as a layer in between Patriot and Iris-T SLM with extended range. That's all. It has no. It was not developed with intercepting ballistic missiles in mind, to put it that way. And SLM, what was the SLM question? Sorry.
No, if I don't. The question wasn't specifically mentioning SLM or SLX, but it mentioned a new variant of the system that can intercept ballistic missiles.
Okay. Yeah, is it from Jones? Yeah.
Yeah.
About testing in UA of new RST capable of. Yeah, okay. I think I could solve the lack of Patriot Pack 3s. Yeah, I think I answered that to the best of my ability. Like I said, it's not meant as the system for intercepting ballistic missiles. As far as I know, Iris-T, I hope you don't hear my cat. She's coming with a gift to me now. Yeah, there she comes. She always meows very loud and then comes with a stuffed animal mouse to me and lays it in front of me. Yeah, like a Luna. Yeah, and Iris-T high def, it's called. I think that's the solution against hypersonic ballistic threats. But yeah, SLX is not meant for that. And Iris-T SLM, which is actually in service in Ukraine, is capable of, with a fair amount of luck, intercepting short-range ballistic missiles, but that's it.
That's crazy. So I can just like say Taurus, and the universe would just pull you onto the stream.
No, honestly, Jay and I were finished doing our business, and I was thought, yeah, I have some time. I can see if they are still online. And yep, they still are. So yeah, here I am.
Oh, that was a very fortuitous. We had a question for you. Cool. I think Colby's also trying to come back, but I think we're wrapping up. Erlen, is there anything else we should cover before we wrap up?
Well, we should remind again that we are looking for a social media manager.
Yeah, it's true.
And
yeah,
we are basically we need someone that is dedicated for that role, so that we won't have the issues that we've had where we're basically waiting for someone else to post something. And we need someone that can step up and take that responsibility as their main responsibility. And if you're interested in being the social media manager of Tochnyi, and possibly also do some other correspondence task, maybe setting up some newsletters, monthly newsletter, or something to that sort, that would be someone that we are looking for. Please contact us through the form on our website if you're interested.
Yeah, like I guess like at our heart, right, we are a research organization. We have a lot of independent researchers that just kind of do their own thing, and they've been working real hard since the full scale invasion. They've just said, I'm going to track this specific part of the battlefield with geospatial stuff or things like that. And we've done our best to create a platform with Tochnyi where we can share their work and hopefully get their work recognized by people who need to make informed decisions about what's going on in Ukraine. That's kind of been the goal. So that's kind of why this stream exists, right? Is we've done our best to create a platform where if they want to, or if they have the time, if they're not buried in work as they almost always are, they can come on and share some of their research with you guys and give you a sense of what's going on. And then, of course, we allow them to publish on the website. We do our best to host information there. So, we're basically the current crew that promotes stuff. And we, of course, have our Twitter account and stuff. So it would be helpful to have someone in addition to the stream kind of managing the overall social media footprint for our researchers. It really kind of helps. It's something that we are like Tochnyi exists in large part to try to provide a means for them to disseminate their work so they can focus on that and not have to worry about I've only got 30 subscribers because I monitor one little section of the front line, and then OSINT aggregators just steal all my stuff and engagement farm it for money. Stuff like that. We did our best to make sure that the work gets recognized and published, and hopefully when it's relevant, put towards the eyes of people that are in decision-making capacities, or at least inform those people. I think it's a noble endeavor if you're interested, and hopefully we get some applicants. Okay, so, yeah, go ahead.
I think maybe we should ask Colby, how did we do when you couldn't reconnect to the stream? Maybe there's something you want to emphasize that we didn't cover.
Yeah, sorry, I the stream crashed on me just as we were getting a bunch more missile questions. What can I say? Provision of SAMP-T NG, new generation or next generation, to Ukraine by France. Look, politicians say a lot of things, especially Macron. We shall see. We shall see what happens. Yeah, I don't know. I certainly hope it's the case. But right now, it's just something Macron has said, and hopefully he follows through on the commitment. That's all I'll say for now. Aster 30 production is very, very marginal, remains very marginal. Supply of missiles to Ukraine for their existing SAMP-T assets, very marginal. I just posted about this on my feed today on this question of on both questions, really, on the provision of SAMP-T fire units and the ability to sustain those fire units with a regular supply of ammunition. This year, there's going to be 3 to 4 times as many Patriot missiles as Aster 30 ballistic missile defense capable Aster 30 missiles are going to be produced. And those are Fabian's estimates that I'm using. So it's very minimal. The provision of missiles is very minimal. It's unclear whether this new system is going to be provided at all. On the IRIS-T question, yeah, Gao covered it pretty much. I'll emphasize that SLX is still like years away. It's like Deal has been doing this very, very slowly. I don't know why so slowly as well. Like they've been working on SLX for like a long time now. And it's just evidently they're not putting a lot of resources behind it because the development is very slow, and we're still looking at like 2 to 3 years before they've got a system that's, you know, in maybe initial operating capability. So that's still very far away. As he said, SLX is not going to introduce a comparable ballistic missile defense capability to Patriot. I will say that the radar that is currently used by IRIS-T SLM, but from Hensoldt, is a very, very, very capable radar. So the radar is not the problem. It's the missile, SLM missile, is just does not have the capability, doesn't have the kinematics, doesn't have the guidance. And so I would say that, again, it's very early, but SLX is more an evolution on SLM, and it's high def, which is an even further away concept they have, that it would be more towards optimization for ballistic missile defense. So people should not view IRIS-T as a solution to this problem. IRIS-T is like super capable. As I said, the radar is super capable, very good at cruise missile defense, but the ballistic missile defense is not a role that it's going to be fulfilling anytime soon. So people shouldn't count on that. People shouldn't count on SAMP-T either, because again, just the production is very poor. So it's not going to fulfill Ukraine's needs. The production base is just way too minimal.
Yeah, thanks, Colby, for your insight on all that. And I think that wraps up all of our questions and our announcements and such. So I'm gonna call the stream here. We've been at it for a while. So yeah, thanks, chat. We appreciate all your questions this week. You guys were asking a lot of questions. It's always good. We like your feedback. We like to learn what you guys want to know more about. And if we ever make a mistake, or you can find a source or something that would be interesting to us, we're always open to new information. Thank you, of course, to our illustrious panel. Thanks to Colby for stopping in and answering all those questions. Germany to Ukraine for coming in and answering that one question by sheer psychic power. Erlen, of course, for running the whole thing. Stanimir for providing, as always, his insights on the Russian economy. And Mr. Germany makes me thank myself for some reason. And then thank you to the people who watched the video after the fact. We know not everyone can make it to the live. If you have any questions, you can throw them in the comments. We'll do our best to address them. And I guess, thanks to I shouldn't say I guess, thanks to our Twitter viewers. I know we recently started broadcasting on Twitter again because we decided to pay Elon his blood money. So thank you for tuning in, and check us out on YouTube. I don't know, it's a nice experience in my opinion. But of course we also appreciate our Twitter viewers. So thanks, guys. And I think that is it from us this week. We will see everyone next week with, I'm sure, another bewildering array of information, because this stuff is always changing and moving very quickly. So we'll see everyone next week. Slava Ukraini.
Heroim Slava.
On behalf of the brave.